and so off you go.
It will become apparent. Right, so I wanted to start. I think I'm not going to go over again the figures that Lindsay told us, shows us about the environmental impact of war and of the military more widely, because I think we know that. So I think I want to start with the kind of this question of, well, what do we do about this? And I think, you know, Lindsay's right to point out that there has been, in one sense, some progression on this. That, you know, back in the Kyoto Agreement back in 1992, it was, you know, you didn't talk about military emissions at all. They were completely left out. So it was this kind of idea, but partly because, okay, that was in the too difficult category, but partly because I think it was this idea that you could green kind of civil society and just leave the military to their fossil fuel related devices, and that would be kind of fine. And in a sense, it's almost like what if you think about the way that kind of US bases work around the world, they're these kind of islands of kind of extreme fossil fuel use, extreme oil dependency, often in countries that actually have quite low carbon footprints. So it's as if the military figuratively is kind of like how the US bases operate around the world operate literally, in a sense. And I think, and it's right to point out that certainly talking about military emissions has moved on slightly since then, that actually, you know, countries can kind of voluntarily declare their emissions. But on the other hand, I think we are seeing with Israel's assault on Gaza and Israel's assault on Lebanon in particular, actually the environmental destruction has become actually a weapon of modern war. That, you know, we recognise that modern wars have always been incredibly destructive of the environment. But I think the tendency has always been to talk about that as if it's accidental. You know, it's just something that just happens. And I think what we're seeing with Israel in particular is that this is actually deliberate. In the same way that actually killing civilians in Gaza and in Lebanon is deliberate. The destruction of the environment in Gaza is actually the point. You know, that destruction of the built environment so that people can't return. And actually the destruction of the natural environment in many ways. I mean, some of what they're doing, particularly in Lebanon, because I think the aim in South Lebanon is not to conquer it and settle it, it's to make it into an uninhabitable wilderness as a buffer zone, I think, for northern Israel. So actually the destruction of the natural environment that we're seeing in South Lebanon is entirely deliberate. And I think this is also true, of course, on a much smaller scale with what Israeli settlers are doing in the West Bank with the destruction of olive groves and all this sort of thing. You know, this is a weapon of war. So I think when we're thinking that, okay, we are finally, in a sense, allowed to think about the carbon emissions that are inherent in war, well, they are going up enormously, not just sort of exponentially because we're seeing more hot conflicts around the world than maybe we were some time ago, but actually because it is becoming much more of a weapon than maybe we're used to thinking. So I don't think we can think that, okay, it's all getting better. And also I think there are huge barriers in the sense of getting the military to report its emissions honestly. And I think Lindsay touched on that, the importance of transparency. Well, when we're not allowed to know actually what the US and indeed UK and also Western powers militaries are doing around the world, the chances of them actually reporting their carbon emissions honestly is pretty nearly zero, I think. And the gaps are huge. It's not even that, oh, well, they'll report most of it. And these are figures from about 10 years ago, but I read a figure where the US military admitted that they used, I think, 395,000 barrels of oil a day. And that was what they admitted that they were using. And estimates are that actually they might be getting through as much as 1 million barrels of oil a day. So that gap is enormous. So we're not going to overcome that with people talking about this at COP, unfortunately. So I think, you know, this raises the question really of kind of, well, can you green the military? I mean, I think as you've referred to a little bit about people talking about, oh, you know, you can have kind of renewable energy running the military. And I think, I mean, this is rather unscientific take on it, but I'm kind of rather skeptical. I kind of think if you want to blow things up, you kind of need fossil fuels. There's a kind of a energy intensity that you get from carbon that you don't get from wind power and solar power. I don't think you can have a solar powered tank, or not a very effective one, for example. But that's a slightly, in a way, a slightly flippant point. The bigger point, though, is that I think we have to understand that it's not accidental that militaries run on oil. US hegemony in the world, and this has been true since the Second World War, is based on the control of oil. So it's not an accident that they get through 1 million barrels a day. This is the entire point. the entire way that the US has made itself into the global superpower is by controlling oil supplies, and then by using those oil supplies to build their military to maintain their power. None of this is accidental. So of course so talking about whether you can green the US military, and from that follows then the UK military and the Israeli military and so on and so on and so on, isn't just a technical question. It's in effect say, can we change the entire basis of US hegemony? And well, we should, and I would like to hope that we can, but again, that's not a technical ask. They're not going to say, oh yes, actually, yes, of course, we will run all of our tanks on solar power, and we will stop exploding things, and we'll stop using fossil fuels, because that's what their power is based on. So we have to recognise that what we're talking about here is not just a sort of a technical debate about how you conduct wars. It's about whether you conduct wars at all, as I think, as we've already heard. So we're not talking here something. When we're talking about the effect on the climate of military emissions, we're not talking about something that's a separate issue from our campaigns against Israel's genocide in Gaza, against the war in Ukraine, against wars around the world. This is actually part of the same issue. The idea that you can actually have a modern military and deal with the climate. It's something that we're told because our governments do not want to give up their modern militaries, and in fact they want there to be more spending on military. But actually it's a lie. You can't have modern military, modern warfare, and deal with the climate crisis. We can have a world that is riven by natural disasters, that has 2.7 degrees centigrade worth of heating, and modern militaries that attempt to protect US hegemony. We can have that. That's fine. Or we can have a world where actually we've addressed the climate crisis and we've reduced emissions, and where we don't actually have military forces. We have to pick one of those two things. There isn't really another choice. And I think we're here because we care about stopping wars, and we care about the climate crisis. And we have to recognise that this is the same issue, that when we're marching against what Israel's doing in Gaza, we are also marching for the only hope we have of a sustainable future, which is ending all wars.